Welcome back. So, you may be staring down the barrel of a 52-minute long video and wondering, is this worth my time? Maybe. If not, just, click down, vote, and leave. I'm great at marketing myself. Anyway, this is me making a knife. This is the first full tang knife that I've made since the Halloween knife, but the Halloween knife was almost made. It was made poorly intentionally because I wanted it to look like a horror / shit show. This one, my intention was to actually make it good, usable, and feel nice when you hold on to it. And right now, the tang is a little too long, but shape's coming together. I found that I like either forming the blade or I think I like forming the blade first, contrary to what's happening right now, and then cutting it off and forming the tang. Because this did fine, but I got that tang way too small for this. And my cutting technique is flawless. Yep. So, after getting it cut off, bang the blade shape out. At this point, my forge is a little hotter. It's hitting a little easier. And even with this lighting, I'm pretty sure that I'm starting to hit it a little too cold. I don't know if you can tell, I'm using the round side of the hammer on the tang. I need to be a little more ginger with that, I've learned. And whether you are thinking this or not, the other 50 minutes of this video are not me just making a handle and grinding. I hit some snags. Hand file for days. Probably hours in this case, not literal days. No big fancy grinders, so this is my main method of shaping knives after forging. And you may or may not notice that we've started to go at much faster speeds through this process. You know how I said that tang is a little too small? Well, that doesn't matter, because this heat treat was unsuccessful. But don't worry, because this next heat treat, just wait for that, it will also be unsuccessful. This is probably the 4th attempt at a heat treat, maybe 5th. I left it in the water too long. I tried something new. It was supposed to be a second in the other one, and it warped the ever-loving shit out of my first attempt. Blessing in disguise. But it also cracked it all the way down the spine, so there is no usable material in that entire knife. Not for smaller knives like I like to make, not for nothing. So, a little lizard break, 4 minutes of, your time, honestly, wasted. He's a cool lizard. And this is where the curse feels like it started. Because the cursed blade Winona has to be beaten out of it. That's a much better shot of that. There we go. Just for ceremony's sake. And so that there's no mistaking this for anything else. Cracked in half. Hit my camera. Little catharsis. Little acceptance. and then a long flat piece of 1080 steel. Beautifully welded, thank you, Keith. That wasn't supposed to be sarcasm. I fucking can't weld. So, forge is hotter, it's running nicer. My thought process is clear. This is probably a few weeks later. And I get down to business of trying to get the area that I'm working on this on to be a little closer to the right size. I did learn too that if your tang seems like it might be a little thicker in width than the blade, go ahead and take care of that in the forging. Don't try to hand file all that down. That is a nightmare. It doesn't serve to help anybody. I believe this was at the beginning of summer, and it was already extremely hot. It was, I was sweating buckets through everything. Still better than doing this inside of a closed garage, which I don't have anyway. But yeah, forming the blade first worked out a little bit better in the long run for that. Because I'm happy with the shape of the blade, and I can mess with the tang till I'm happy with it. Then I cut it off, and then I can hammer it even more so to shape. And even with the hand filing later, this was very, very enjoyable. Now, you also might be asking, or not asking this at all because it's not where brains go, does the curse continue? There's still 45 minutes left of video, so yeah. I can say with confidence, however, that this knife does make it to the end of the journey. After a lot of small hits, I started to feel pretty confident that I needed to get it flat at this point. What doesn't get shown is the amount of time that I actually spent fixing it once I cut it off here. Because I started grinding it down like this and thinking, that's gonna take forever. So this is already after some fixing it with forging as opposed to grinding. One hammer blow can move like, I'm gonna say 5 minutes worth of grinding. I'm gonna be bold and lie to you and say things that I don't actually know. But you can already see that the tang there just shaped a little bit differently than the cutoff, which is good. It's necessary. And for what it's worth, this bench grinder is, like, it's really good for the rough stuff. It's ancient, or at least old, but there's something to be said about how inexpensive a bench grinder is and how quickly and efficiently that it removes material. I wouldn't use this on a hardened blade, but for this part, for profiling and what have you, it's a little easier on the wrists than 2.5 hours of hand filing. In Sharpie, we have sort of the shape that I'm going to go for, and still just a little bit too much tang. Got to take down that tang. I was pretty proud of that. I've gotten pretty good at using a hacksaw, even though it is my least favorite tool that I have to use. It wouldn't be one of my videos if there wasn't a decade of hand filing. Yeah, you can see how much thicker the tang is, even here, compared to the spine. I've also discovered a type of hand file that is magic cut. And it's both aggressive and leaves a really decent finish for how aggressive it is. I like it a lot. I had to get it on the internet because they don't just sell different kinds of files on at Home Depot. Sorry, they don't sell anything more than the very standard files that you would find in any normal home shop. Which is unfortunate because different kinds of files that I didn't know existed are super cool. Let me go on about files. I will rejoice when I have a 2x72-inch belt grinder, or some other kind of beefy-ass belt grinder, because I know it'll help me not worry about this step as much. This is my least favorite part of anything, is flattening the tang on both sides. And since it's my least favorite, it should go as fast as possible for you. The curse continues. The blade has developed a warp that either I didn't catch, or I think it was always there, but I didn't catch it until I looked down the blade, and man, looking at this, I tried to fix that. So I took it to the forge, I banged it out straight, like as honestly straight as I could get it, and then I reprofiled it, re-cleaned all the sides, re-cleaned all the edges. I believe I also hammered in a bevel because I thought it would be smart to just like file all that bevel down by hand. No.
Hello, Tucker.
Puppy.
What do you want? What do you want? Huh? No, Tucker bad. You don't
Tucker
want
good.
And I don't like the thunder. Do you like the thunder? I don't like the thunder. No, I don't. No, I don't. No, I don't. Oh, off. Come here. Go pee.
It's a good boy. But Tucker would also agree, hammer in your bevels, because hammering means less hand filing. I'm also fighting against time because I can hear and feel a storm coming. The wind picked up and then stopped.
Hi. I don't see you ever.
Hello, Eva.
Who's a big sweet puppy? Huh? And she's gone.
Eva was much less interested in hanging around. She just wanted to say hi. She's a sweet goblin. Yep, Pip coming saying hi. Hello, Valerie. And I really am filing like a bat out of hell. I'm positive that I can do all of my hand filing super fast.
Oh, those are big raindrops. Those are big raindrops. This is diminishing returns. Nope, done. Can't do it.
I was wrong. In broad daylight, the bottom drops out. And so another day down. Ignore the torso in the back. He'll try to ignore you. Anyway. Back to hand filing at my home bench. The same hand file that I was using It was nice, it was new, it was clean, and I got it because I really wanted... I had it in my head that I could finish the whole thing, all of the things that I needed to do with one hand file. You can tell that I gave up pretty quickly when I saw my beefy ass file just sitting there. So that was short-lived. By this point, I'm confident that the I'm pretty confident, fairly confident, almost positive that any warping in the blade, not an issue at this point. So that confidence being what it is, getting so much of this bevel shaved down, I think that the way that I clamped it created another warp. Because I have this, I'm pretty happy with the bevels on the knife. I'm not displeased with anything, but man, a warp at this point, I was thinking, would suck. It would suck really bad. Because I've got it pretty straight. I ended up doing even more fixing by hand. Trying to get them even. Nothing outlandish, but the way that I put pressure on it, the way that I clamp it, not clamping it between two flat surfaces or like two boards. I think that's what caused the majority of the warping in the blade, because it just did not make any sense that I would miss that on the day where that's all that I was there to fix. And now that edge is pretty much in the middle. It's almost sharp all the way down, which prior to heat treat, I don't know if that's the best thing, but this is me clamping it as tight as possible, trying to get that metal to relax for the love of Satan, and it just wouldn't. So now, bevel's complete. The curse is weakening. But you see how that forge looks really, really cold? The moment that I got there and it started getting hot, it ran out of propane almost that minute. So if you're ever stressed, frustrated, or something's going wrong, take a second, take a step back. Don't just try to force it, because this is not the way you do it. I need that blade hot enough to move under a wooden mallet, and that's it. New propane, calm mind. The curse has no more power. I'm doing everything I can to not attribute this to an unseen force. And the blood hammer does great. It got that nickname on that day, not because it drew blood, but because it's bleeding fire and it's got a red fucking head. That's it. This knife got its name from its soon-to-be owner, so thank you for that. Items need names. This name is the Cursed Blade Winona, named after Winona Ryder and the curse of the blade itself. This is canola oil. I did some research about heat treating and how to get it more correct. I heated it up with rebar. I got it to non-magnetic. I let it sit there for just a little bit. And then I just left the blade in the hot oil. And then put it right back in. Nothing fancy. Nothing like... As little left to right movement as possible. A warp at this point would be bad. but a kitty cat is good. Hello, Selena. Yes? Who's a good girl? It's you. The heat treat is successful. The knife, I believe at this point, has been tempered. I've just been scraping off the scale. I tempered it literally as soon as I got home, as soon as I possibly could. I was pleased that it skated a file. I was pleased that after the temper, it wasn't as hard as it could possibly be, seeing as how this is going to be a very practical knife, but it's also going to be a very tough knife. And on to hand sanding. I know that you tend to hand sand forever. It's a long process. It's not the most fun thing in the world, but the quality that sort of feels like it comes out of it starts to make it fun. Like you move through the grits, the sounds become more pleasant, the feeling becomes more pleasant. It's just an all-around... It's like the finish line for the knife. Or the blade, specifically. Finish line for the knife is epoxying the handle. But there's ages of hand sanding, but it's very much so worth it. Originally I was thinking, you know, I'll leave it at a cool 600 grit. And my brain did not approve of that. Instead, my brain was like, you want to go to 2000 grit. And then I said, yes, I do. So that's what I did. I took it all the way to 2000. I tried to control the scratch pattern as neatly as possible, getting rid of as many of the scratches from the previous grit that I could possibly see. As far as I know, and as far as you can see, it worked out pretty well. I'm rather pleased. I do go back and touch up the hand sanding a bunch of times to try to get like any odd striations out. So you can see the old knife in the background. I had already started planning out the handle material while I had time. This is dogwood from North Carolina. Like it is a piece of wood from my state, which I like because from what I understand, it came from another woodworker who my mom made friends with, and honestly, he's super cool. And he was like, "Hey, here's a bunch of scraps that I can't do anything with." I'm guessing his project scales are bigger. I've seen some of his projects, and they're just cool. But these scraps are useless for him. For me, every single scrap in there is either either scales to or not scales, but a knife handle, or rings, or just any other miscellaneous decorative piece of something. Like it's a great box of wood. And so when dogwood was chosen as the handle material, I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty stoked, because this stuff, at least this piece, is hard as hell. It's awesome. It has a bunch of figure from something. I have no idea what caused that color pattern, or the molting, or any of the other things. I don't think molting is the right word, but it's great. And because, you know, if I'm going to hand file, I'm also going to rip cut. Non-stop. So I take my little marking gauge. Oh, I'm squaring the whole billet so that I can get a reference line to... Why am I squaring the whole billet? I'm squaring it for my own reasons. I think it was so that I can make it uniform for later. I had time. I didn't have access to my forge at this point, so I was doing whatever work that I could. It was hard, but it was very nice to hand plane. All things considered. So fast. Don't breathe out. Don't breathe like you're out of breath. Come on, man. You can see, or at least I can see, that I am glistening with sweat. Because it's always warm. And that saw is not meant for rip cuts, but it was, since it's so flat and it has a rigid spine, I thought it would be a better choice. And I mean, it did a decent job. I have 2 pieces of wood. Not shown here. I hand flattened it with a flat plate and 80 grit and 120 grit sandpaper. A drill press would make this whole process much nicer. But a hand drill and a box of drill bits that say hard metal on them at Lowe's, I believe, they did a really good job. I usually have trouble hand drilling through any of the knives that I've tried to make pinholes for, just because the steel gets so hard, or the steel like work hardens, or accidentally hardens where I don't want it to. So look for hard metal bits that say that they're for hard metal. I got a pin stuck in there. Fixed it. Using the knife, the holes that are in the knife, and another hole on the other side, I can make sure that they all line up real crisp. Just gotta make sure it fits. And get another pin stuck in there. Good job. Waller out the hole a little bit. Not bad. Not bad. Did it again. And if you're still with me at this point, I know that this is a long video, but I still don't know what I enjoy showing as much as I possibly can, but I want it to still be somewhat respectful to your time and my time for the whole process. I like showing the whole process unless it's a focused video about one thing specifically. Here, I'm just making sure that any differences between the pieces are taken care of together, because it makes my life a lot easier, like finishing the knife off. And you may have noticed some little cracks and some wormholes. Anytime that I found it in there, I just used super glue to fill it. You'll see. I may have warped the handle to my vise, trying to flatten the knife a couple times. So now, every now and again, I have to hit it with a hammer to make sure that it goes into its home and gets out of my way. You know, when I see things like this, I wonder why I do the things that I do, because that saw wants to take a fucking ride to the ground. Luckily, I finished the cut before that happens. Yeah, this is my favorite rasp in the whole world. Specifically for wood. It is, hands down, the nicest to use. It feels the best. It doesn't clog. It's great. And I'm sure there are exceptions to that, but like, I don't like the solid wood rasps as much. They hurt more to use. This is just a crisscross of saw blades, effectively. It's great. Look up Shinto rasp if you're interested. Doing some shaping and sanding on the top bits before it gets glued, because even though I do end up having to do some fixing after it's glued, I won't actually be able to get in there and shape it safely for either the tools or the knife blade itself. Yep, taking care of some of those cracks. This worked out pretty good, and cases where it was a little too... I thought the gap was a little too big for this thinner super glue, I added some sawdust. I almost glued the two pieces together right there. I'm lucky that I didn't. And when I get closer to the surface, I switch to a less aggressive file and keep on keeping on. I do not have many files that are in a condition where they need to be decommissioned, so rust, no big deal. If it doesn't cut, that's a big deal. And there's a 100% chance if I have a power tool that I can use for a situation, I'm going to do it. This is a perfect case of that. And in case anybody is wondering what the best grit of sandpaper there is, a question that nobody's asked, it's 80. 80 is the most aggressive for the finish that it leaves. 120 is okay. 220 is alright. 400, that's a nice grit. It's not for removing things, but that feels pretty good. But 80 grit to 120 grit, that will take 80 grit specifically will get you where you need to go. 120 grit will make sure that you get there without making any violations. Violating the law, like it's an analogy for speeding on the highway. You know what? I don't need to explain myself to you. Ooh, maybe I should. Anyway, just flushing it up to the knife handle. I used to know the number. I think I think there's about 12 hours of footage total, but including the stuff that I didn't put on camera or show or record, there's easily 15 to 20 hours put in this thing. Which may not be necessary because I feel like I learned a lot of things. And here, there are some irregularities in the tang, and I wanted to make sure that it didn't mess anything up in the glue up. So I have some very thin pieces of leather that are going to be liners for the knife. Or the knife handles. Knife scales? Knife scales. Hey, we're in the finish line. After a test that I did where I knew that that was going to work, I was very pleased with the result. It looks pretty cool. The way that the leather absorbed epoxy was great. I committed. So everything here gets cleaned with acetone. Sorry, acetone. Acetone? Anyway, I'll stop that bit. Any grease from my hands that's on any of these pieces, any oils, it's not going to make for the best fit, or the best bond for the glue. And I would like to nip that shit in the bud. I'm using 30-minute epoxy because I want it to be the strongest possible. And this knife is already late by months and I already feel bad. So the end product, like, this is the best chance for it to last as long as possible. Well beyond the lifetimes of me or the person that it goes to. A knife for a generation, I'm hoping. I did plenty of dry fits to make sure that this would work. Very pleased. I should have been more mindful of the top of the knife scales and the way that the leather liners were shaped, because that causes me some grief later. The clock here, however, is ticking, and I need to make sure that every clamp that I have goes where it needs to go. Every clamp. So now that that Cthulhu of clamps is being removed, the epoxy's set, the leather absorbed plenty of the stuff, it's hard, which is great, it closes off any gaps and any irregularities. It's both a cheat and functional and aesthetic all at the same time. So now I just have to reprofile everything. This rasp makes quick work of it. Dremel tool makes quick work of it. Everything works out. The curse is lifted. Nothing else goes wrong in such a way that I couldn't handle it as soon as it came up. It's okay if something goes wrong. To some extent. I mean, it's okay if something goes wrong when you're making something. Things happen. So you take a step back and you fix it. Even if it takes you a little while. If you're under a tight deadline and something goes wrong, it's also okay. Just communicate. Talk to a client. Talk to the person that you're making it for. Talk to yourself. I know I am. I'm doing it right now. In the future, I'm going to make sure those pins are a little shorter. But brass and hacksaw wins. At this point, I'm elated how well things are going. I'm taking off that little tip at the bottom there, so it can't catch you when you grab it. And once all the excess epoxy and all that's off, like, it's blocky, but technically it is a semi-usable knife. And this is what I was talking about. When stuff goes wrong, you take your time and you fix it, but the leather and the epoxy next to the blue tape, it just kind of, it screwed up. It was a bad call to leave that much leather and that much room next to a finished hand-sanded bevel that I had worked on for so long, let alone the top of the knife scale. That could have been better. Well, I do think that this ends up being the best knife that I've made up until this point. There's still plenty of stuff to learn. I knew that it would create a scratch, so I made sure that the scratch was both prominent and visible, so it looks more like an element as opposed to just a garbagey mistake. A happy little accident, as one Bob Ross would put it. Same thing on the other side. I'm marking down where I want the knife to be beveled. It's as simple as that, just something to see what I'm doing. Get down. Thank you. Yeah, at this point, there's maybe 20 minutes of hand shaping total after this. So we are in the home stretch. I can feel the project coming to an end. One thing that is good about that rasp is it is still hardened, and if you hit metal, that's fine. It's not great for it, but I've also never tried to file down metal with it. I don't really want to, because that's not what I want to use this tool for. I want it for a little longer than that. And while this process is not too terribly long, it is very methodical. And I found that I really like, would you get down? Down, down, down. I find that I really like the handle part. Not entirely sure why. I think it's the feeling that the project's coming to a close. Maybe it's just that once it has a handle, it feels good. I just know that I like doing it. But I'm making an ever so slight dive into the finger area, just so that it's a little nicer to hold on to. I didn't go as far as making finger notches down the whole thing. I don't think that that's particularly wise to do when you don't have the hand of the person holding it. And even then, it would look kind of tacky on this knife. Not saying that people that do that make tacky knives. That's not what I'm saying. At all. Period. Not a joke. One thing about sanding these rivets, the wood sand's a little faster, so I needed to file down the nubs so that the sanding on everything was a little more even. I think this is something that I could have done a better job on. it doesn't feel off, but you can tell on one side over the other that they're ever so slightly humped. Not fucked, humped. We all know how exciting hand sanding is. We all know how exciting it is to really see somebody rub something back and forth. Oh, no, 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 no. You went down the wrong path, Adrian. Yeah. And there is no trick to hand sanding other than getting the scratches out from the previous grit. That's the whole point. I think I take this down to 220, maybe 400 grit. Either way, at the end, it felt good and it didn't feel too smooth. Too smooth is, oh god, this knife is slipping out of my hand. Oh god, oh god, oh god. Where did it go? Oh, it's in my leg. That's too smooth. But comfortable and not distractingly rough, 80 grit is not the right finish. 120 grit's okay. 220 is sort of a Goldilocks area. Once again, back to hand files, back to sanding. Back and forth, never stopping. Oh god. Even sped up, you can hear that it sounds nicer at this point too. I also think in a blind taste test, I could tell you which one is 80, 120, 220, and 300. At least in 3M grits. This is the first time I've seen the blade in a while. Damn. I love this process. Oiling wood. The whole thing. I'm really pleased by... I'm just ecstatic at how nicely it oiled up. You can even see that the leather's taken on some color from... Well, I'm just using plain food grade mineral oil. Nothing crazy. I found that this, for whatever reason, it doesn't oxidize anything near like what boiled linseed oil would. And I didn't want anything to change the color of the wood. I just wanted it to look wet all the time, which I realize is I realize now that that's what oil is for. Does it look wet? Yes. Is it dry? You oiled it. Now, I was surprised that I was surprised that I could get it sharper around the curve. The curve of the blade. The base is a tougher and more beefy build, but that curve got really sharp. Not perfect. Better. Gooder. Not great. It's not a razor blade at the bottom, but it's definitely sharp enough to do anything that needs to be done. As long as paper is not its first opponent. God. Like there, if you stab into something, you can gut it like a fish. You could probably gut a fish with it. Shit knows you can cut wood with it. Garden, it's a good general purpose knife. If you took it camping, it could do almost anything you needed it to do, except for keep you warm at night. Here it is. Ultimately, I am happy with how it came out. The curse is lifted, or at least dormant. That shot is super bloomed out and turbo red. Fix it. Thank you. But yeah. Dogwood handle, brass pins, 1080 steel blade. All the rough forging marks that I could leave in, I left in. And that's the shtick. Thank you for watching. And if you've stuck with me for any period of time, I don't do this on a schedule. I have a day job, and it requires a lot of my brain, but I do really like making videos. Another tradition is I never clean up the spines of my knives. Maybe I'll change that someday. Maybe. Maybe. No, there's more things in store. I recently got a mini lathe, and I will be making rings to try to pay for the mini lathe. So when I get better at it, I'll make a video and show you what I've learned. If anybody's still watching, again, thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye!